In February 2023, 3 codebreakers published a paper proving that Mary, Queen of Scots, had been running her own counterintelligence operation against the English government for years before they killed her. The letters had been sitting in the wrong filing cabinet at the National Library of France since the 1500s. Nobody had read them. And when you do read them, the woman in those pages is not the lovesick tragic queen from your school textbooks. She is cold, she is calculating, she is giving orders. Which makes the trap that killed her even worse because they did not catch a fool. They built a machine precise enough to catch someone who had been outmanoeuvring them for a decade. The popular version of Mary Stuart goes something like this. Beautiful, reckless, unlucky in love, maybe complicit in her husband's murder, definitely stupid about Bothwell, imprisoned for 19 years by her smarter cousin Elizabeth, and then executed because she got caught scheming. There is a simpler version of every one of those claims, and most of them are wrong. Start with the body. Mary was around 5'11", in the 1560s that made her a spectacle just standing in a room. Her mother Mary of Guise was about the same height. When Mary fled across the Solway into England in 1568, witnesses could pick her out of the crowd on height alone. She had survived smallpox twice, the first time in infancy without scars, the second time in France in 1557, when the royal physician Jean Fenel was credited with saving her appearance. She had severe measles at Dumbarton in 1548, and probably rubella the following year. Contemporary portraits of her, the genuine ones from life, do not suggest the striking beauty legend insists on. Tudor Times puts it plainly. Her impact was animation, voice, and presence. The face was secondary. A quick myth about her body. Documentaries love to claim Mary had purple or red urine from hereditary porphyria. That detail belongs to her son James VI, whose physician described his urine as purple as Alicante wine. The Stuart porphyria thesis was proposed by Ida McAlpine and Richard Hunter in the BMJ in 1968, and traced back through the line from George III. The case for Mary rests on her abdominal pain, vomiting, mental disturbance after the Rizzio murder, and reports of blistering hands in sunlight. It has been heavily challenged. The competing diagnosis, going back to McNulty, is a gastric ulcer. The Westminster Abbey tomb has never been opened. No DNA analysis has ever been performed on her remains. Any claim of modern DNA confirmation of porphyria or height is fabricated. The famous Auburn hair needs correcting too. She was born fair. The colour darkened to red gold through adolescence. By the time she climbed the scaffold at 44, her real hair was short and grey. When the executioner lifted her head and shouted, "God save the Queen," the head dropped out of the wig. The auburn locks the crowd saw dangling from his fist were horsehair. She was Queen of Scotland at 6 days old, shipped to France at 5, married to the Dauphin at 15, widowed at 18, back in Scotland at 19 to govern a country she barely remembered, married again at 22 to Henry Stuart Lord Darnley, and a prisoner of England by 25. The speed of the trajectory matters because it explains the density of the catastrophe. There was no decade of settled rule. There was no learning curve. Every crisis arrived before the last one finished burning. Darnley is the hinge point. He was tall, vain, syphilitic by most modern assessments, and within a year of the wedding he had conspired with a group of Protestant lords to murder David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary, in front of her while she was 6 months pregnant. They dragged Rizzio out of the supper room next to her bedchamber at Holyrood on 9th March 1566 and stabbed him. Mary herself counted 56 wounds. Other sources say 57. George Douglas, Darnley's own uncle, yanked Darnley's dagger from his belt and left it in the corpse, as proof the king had ordered the killing. There was nothing subtle about it. A quick note on the famous bloodstain at Holyrood. It is almost certainly fabricated. Charles II replaced the floorboards a century after the murder. Until recently, palace staff openly repainted the stain each year as a tourist attraction. Dried blood does not stay red. Earlier visitors chipped pieces off as souvenirs, which gives you an idea of the intellectual rigour involved. 7 months after Rizzio's murder, in October 1566, Mary rode roughly 50 to 60 miles round trip to visit Bothwell at Hermitage Castle. By 17th October she was vomiting. The contemporary record says 50 to 60 times, in agony, blind, mute, convulsing. Around 24th October, The French diplomat Ducroc reported that her body had gone cold and people believed she had died. Her half-brother Moray actually began handling her goods, already dividing the estate. Her physician, Charles Now, performed 3 hours of vigorous limb manipulation and forced wine into her. She vomited old blood and came back. She later said she wished she had died at Jedburgh. Given what followed, you can see why. Less than a year after Rizzio, Darnley was dead. He had been convalescing at Kirk Field in Edinburgh from what was almost certainly syphilis. Around 2 a.m. on 10th February 1567, 2 barrels of gunpowder detonated under his bedroom and levelled the house. The bodies of Darnley and his valet William Taylor were found in the orchard beyond the town wall, wearing night clothes, with no burns, no soot, no blast injuries at all. A chair, a rope, and a dagger lay nearby. The bodies showed signs of strangulation. They had gotten out of the house before the explosion and been killed by assassins waiting in the garden. The gunpowder was the cover story for a murder that had already happened. Within weeks a placard appeared across Edinburgh. Mary drawn as a mermaid, which in the Renaissance meant a prostitute, and Bothwell drawn as a hare, the heraldic charge on the Hepburn coat of arms, with his initials J.H. The accusation was public. Mary married Bothwell 3 months later, on May 15th, 1567. By June 15th she had surrendered to the Protestant lords at Carberry Hill. By July 24th she had abdicated at Lochleven in favour of her infant son James. By May 1568 she was in England. She would never leave. The men around her met ends that matched the violence of the era. Pierre de Chastelar, a French poet from the Dauphine, was found hiding under her bed at Holyrood around February 1563, pardoned, and then caught again under the bed at Rossen Castle in Burntisland on Valentine's Day, reportedly while the Queen was undressing. Mary ordered her half-brother Moray to have him executed. He was beheaded at the Mercat Cross of St Andrews on February 22, 1563. According to Brantome, he read Ronsard's Hymne de l'Amour on the walk to the scaffold, then turned toward Holyrood and called out, "Adieu, the most beautiful and the most cruel princess of the world." After the execution, Secretary of State William Maitland told the Spanish ambassador that Chastelar had confessed to being sent by French Huguenots to ruin Mary's reputation and kill her chances of a marriage to Don Carlos of Spain, a honey trap sent by Protestants to discredit a Catholic queen. John Knox was another kind of problem. His first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women, published in 1558, was aimed at Catholic Mary I of England. By the time it circulated, both Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots had taken their respective thrones, and Knox spent the rest of his career trying to walk back a text that condemned female sovereignty in absolute terms. He had 5 recorded face-to-face interviews with Mary, drawn from his own history of the Reformation in Scotland, and reduced her to tears more than once. From the pulpit he likened her to Athaliah and Jezebel. Knox was not trying to influence Mary. He was performing for the Scottish Protestant lords who would eventually remove her. She was the audience for his sermons in exactly the way a target is the audience for the gun pointed at it. Bothwell's end was worse. After Carberry Hill he fled north, reached Norway, was arrested over a debt to a former mistress named Anna Thronson, and was handed to King Frederick II of Denmark. He was held first at Malmö, then moved to Dragsholm Castle, 47 miles west of Copenhagen. The legend that he was chained to a pillar half his own height has physical evidence. A circular groove is still worn into the stone floor around the pillar where visitors can see it. He went insane. He died at Dragsholm on April 14, 1578, aged 44, after roughly a decade chained in that room. In 1858 the body was exhumed and identified. The dried condition earned it the name Bothwell's mummy. For more than a century it was displayed in a glass-fronted coffin in the crypt of Fairvale Church. From 1976 the remains were sealed in a closed oak coffin. Denmark has refused multiple Scottish repatriation requests. The casket letters, the supposed smoking gun of Mary's complicity in Darnley's murder, are worth exactly as much as a copy of a translation of a copy, because that is what they are. James Douglas, 4th Earl of Morton, produced a silver casket on June 20, 1567, containing 8 letters and a sonnet sequence allegedly between Mary and Bothwell. The originals passed from Morton to Moray to William Ruthven, Earl of Gowrie. When Gowrie was executed in 1584, the casket reverted to the 18-year-old James VI, who almost certainly destroyed them to protect his mother's name and his own claim to the English throne. No scholar alive has ever examined the originals. Antonia Fraser argued partial forgery. Letter 2, the long Glasgow letter, reads as disjointed stream of consciousness and was most likely genuine Mary letters spliced with interpolations. John Guy performed forensic textual analysis and concluded around 1,500 to 1,800 words were genuine, while 1,000 to 1,200 were planted. Guy called the Casket letters a fix by Mary's enemies to destroy her, an ingenious, devious one. Jenny Wormald, the most sceptical of Mary's biographers, accepted the letters as substantially real, but noted that the destruction in 1584 was itself evidence they were incriminating. Elizabeth's commissioners at the York and Westminster conferences of October 1568 to January 1569 viewed the letters. Mary was never allowed to see them. The verdict was deliberately inconclusive, which was the whole point. Mary was tainted but not condemned. It justified keeping her locked up without the diplomatic crisis of convicting a fellow anointed sovereign. 19 years of captivity followed. She moved through Carlisle, Bolton Castle, Tutbury, she loathed it, Wingfield Manor, Sheffield Castle, Sheffield Manor Lodge, Chatsworth, Buxton, Chartley, Tixall and Fotheringhay. Sheffield was the longest stretch by far. She arrived on November 28, 1570, aged 27, and spent roughly 14 years there under George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury. Elizabeth set Shrewsbury's allowance at £52 per week in 1569. His actual annual cost ran above £12,000 against irregular crown payments of around £2,700, leaving the richest noble in England chronically subsidising the imprisonment of a queen he had not asked to guard. Her body deteriorated. By her late 30s she could not always write or walk or stand from severe pain in her side, right arm and hips. She was treated at the Buxton Thermal Springs roughly 9 times between 1573 and 1584. Elizabeth eventually banned the trips because Mary was holding her own court there and meeting locals. On her final visit in the summer of 1584, Mary scratched a Latin verse on a windowpane with a diamond. She knew she would not be back. The Shrewsbury arrangement collapsed in 1584 when Bess of Hardwicke and her sons spread rumours that Mary and the Earl were lovers. Mary retaliated with a letter to Elizabeth that is genuinely astonishing for its recklessness. It purported to record Bess's private gossip, that Elizabeth had slept with Leicester infinite times, with the French envoy Simier, with Anjou, that Elizabeth was not as other women, anatomically incapable of intercourse and in no way a virgin, and a catalogue of Bess's mockery of Elizabeth's vanity about her hands and face. The letter, in French, in Mary's hand, appears to have been intercepted by Burghley or Walsingham before reaching Elizabeth. A copy survives in the National Archives. It is hard to know whether Mary sent it as a weapon or as a suicide note. Sir Amias Paulet replaced Sir Ralph Sadler as jailer on the 19th of April 1585 at Tutbury. Paulet was a Puritan who took the assignment as a religious obligation. He removed Mary's cloth of state from the dining chamber, a deliberate stripping of royal status that she felt more than any physical restriction. He stopped her servants from using the wool walk, disarmed her Scottish retainers, and banned her maundy almsgiving and gifts to local servants, explicitly to prevent her from corrupting anyone she came into contact with. The move to Chartley Manor on Christmas Eve 1585 tightened the screws further. Chartley became the killing ground. The captivity was not passive. This is where the 2023 Cipher Discovery matters. George Lassery, Norbert Biermann and Satoshi Tomokio published their findings in the journal Cryptologia in February 2023. They had cracked 57 ciphered letters that had been misfiled at the Bibliotheque nationale de France for centuries, catalogued under Italian affairs from the 1520s and 1530s. The letters were written between 1578 and 1584. Around 50 of the 57 were entirely unknown to historians. That is roughly 50,000 words of new primary material, the largest single addition to the Mary Stuart corpus in over a century. The cipher was a homophonic substitution system with nomenclator elements. 219 distinct graphical symbols drawn from geometric shapes, Greek and Latin letters, alchemical glyphs, and Arabic numerals with diacritics to tell variants apart. There were dedicated symbols for specific people. An elongated H meant George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury. Almost all 57 letters went to the same man, Michel de Castelnau de Mauvissière, the French ambassador in London. They cover negotiations for her release. The proposed marriage between Elizabeth and the Duke of Anjou. Mary saw it as a performance, not a real negotiation. The Ruthven raid of August 1582, when Protestant nobles kidnapped her teenage son James VI. Catholic political strategy, her health, her conditions. And threaded through all of it, constant warnings about English intelligence operations, including the accurate assessment that some of her own people and staff inside the French embassy were already working for Walsingham. Estelle Paranqui of Northeastern University, who has been working through the corpus, described the Mary of these letters as massively politically astute, the one giving orders, someone making decisions, not mistakes. The lovesick prisoner of the public correspondence was a performance. In cipher, in private, she was running her own counterintelligence. She named her enemies by name. Walsingham she called a clever man and master deceiver who falsely offers friendship. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, Elizabeth's favourite, she treated as a personal enemy. France itself she described with bitterness, betrayed by her Guy's relatives for failing to rescue her. 7 of the 57 deciphered letters from 1583 to 1584 have matching plaintext versions in the UK National Archives, copies passed to Walsingham by a mole inside the French embassy. The match proves authorship. It also proves something else. Walsingham was reading her secret correspondence years before the Babington plot in 1586. The security breach everyone treats as the first major one was at least the third. The other 50 letters never appeared in Walsingham's files. Her network was working, not perfectly, not always, but substantially better than the standard narrative allows. The codebreakers cracked the cipher using a computational hill-climbing attack developed through the Decrypt project at Uppsala University, which recovered 30 to 40% of the plaintext. Manual linguistic reconstruction in early modern French completed the rest. The publication date was timed to February 7th, 2023, the 436th anniversary of her execution. While she could not send uncensored letters, she could stitch. Mary produced roughly 300 surviving embroideries during captivity. Claire Hunter, in Embroidering Her Truth in 2022, argued these functioned as a parallel uncensored correspondence once her mail was intercepted. The most pointed example hangs in the Royal Collection, a panel showing a crowned ginger cat batting at a grey mouse on a checked floor, Mary's MA monogram stitched in. Textile historian Margaret Swain proposed, and both the V&A and Royal Collection now note, that the ginger fur is a deliberate jab at red-haired Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the crowned predator. Mary is the cornered mouse. That is treason stitched in silk, hung in plain sight in a Talbot household, and nobody stopped her because it was just needlework. Her personal emblem was a marigold turning toward the sun with the Latin motto, non inferiora secutus, not following lesser things. The double meaning is hard to miss. Mary's gold, and the flower turns visibly away from England toward a higher sun, the Catholic sun. The most dangerous piece of needlework was a cushion. At the 1572 treason trial of Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk John Leslie, Bishop of Ross, testified that Mary's servant Bortwick had delivered Norfolk a cushion bearing the motto, Virescit vulnera virtues, virtue flourishes by its wounds, with a device showing a hand from a cloud holding a pruning knife severing a barren vine branch. The barren vine was read as Elizabeth, the virgin queen who would produce no heir. The pruning hand was Norfolk's right to remove her, so the dynastic vine could bear fruit. That cushion was submitted as evidence at the trial that ended with Norfolk's execution on June 2nd, 1572. Needlework introduced as evidence in a capital treason case. That actually happened. Norfolk, incidentally, never met Mary in person. They exchanged ciphered letters. He sent her a diamond ring at midsummer 1570 as a token of betrothal. She sent him an embroidered pillow. The entire relationship was conducted through code and cloth. Her own cloth of state bore the motto En ma fin est mon commencement. In my end is my beginning. When her son James took Elizabeth's throne in 1603, the phrase read like a curse that landed. Now. The trap. In December 1585, a man named Gilbert Gifford arrived in England on a ship from France. He had been recruited by Walsingham at the port of Rye. Gifford had established himself in Paris among Mary's circle as a trustworthy Catholic courier. His job was to set up a secret postal channel between Mary, now held at Chartley Manor under the Puritan jailer Sir Amias Paulet, and the outside world. With Paulet's cooperation, a brewer in Burton-on-Trent hid leather-wrapped letters inside a hollow, watertight bung fitted into the weekly beer cask delivered to Chartley. Mary thought this was her lifeline. Every letter she sent and received passed first through the hands of Thomas Phelippes, Walsingham's cryptographer. Understand the sequence. Walsingham did not discover an existing plot and investigate it. He built the communication channel, controlled the courier, employed the codebreaker, and waited for Mary to use the system he had designed. The legal architecture was already in place before a single letter moved through the beer barrel. The Bond of Association, passed in 1584 and 1585, and the Act for the Queen's Safety in 1585 established that any conspiracy in Mary's name could condemn her, even without proving she had personally consented. Walsingham described his own operation as casting out the line. The noose was legal first, the bait was cryptographic second. Anthony Babington was the bait. On the 6th of July 1586, Babington wrote to Mary laying out an assassination plan against Elizabeth, including 6 gentlemen assassins. Phelippes deciphered it and forwarded it to Mary through the beer barrel channel. On July 17th, Mary replied. The letter, which became known as the Gallows Letter, gave guarded approval. She wrote of the foreign troops and acknowledged the plan to dispatch the usurping competitor. She discussed logistics. This was not an innocent woman dictating pleasantries. Here is where the forgery enters. Before forwarding Mary's reply to Babington, Phelippes added a postscript forged in Mary's own cipher. The forged edition asked Babington to provide the names of the 6 gentlemen who were to accomplish the plan. Phelippes drew a small gallows on his file copy of the letter. He knew what he had built. The forged postscript was designed to get the conspirators to name themselves in writing on a document that appeared to come from Mary's hand. Mary authorised the assassination plan. Her own secretaries Claude Now and Gilbert Curl confirmed the contents of the July 17th letter under interrogation. No serious historian disputes she engaged with the plot. The revisionist point is not her innocence. The revisionist point is that the single most damning piece of evidence, the request for the assassins' names, was fabricated by an English government cipher clerk, and the channel through which all of this correspondence flowed was designed by Walsingham, operated by Walsingham's agent, and decrypted by Walsingham's codebreaker before anyone else read a word. She had survived being implicated in plots before, the Ridolfi plot in 1571, the Throckmorton plot in 1583. She was not caught in 1586 because she suddenly became careless. She was caught because the legal machinery had changed. The bond of association meant the letters alone were enough to kill her, regardless of whether the named assassination ever came close to happening. The trial at Fotheringhay on 14th and 15th October 1586 gave her no chance. She was denied legal counsel. Her own papers had been seized at Chartley on 11th August. She could not call witnesses. She was never shown the original ciphered letters. The only evidence presented was Phelippes' decipherments, read aloud by the prosecution. She challenged the commission's jurisdiction over an anointed foreign queen. The judges left, went back to London and convicted her on October 25th. Elizabeth signed the death warrant on 1st February 1587, handed it to Secretary William Davison, and then simultaneously asked Walsingham to sound out Paulet about quietly murdering Mary under the bond of association, bypassing the execution entirely. Paulet refused. He wrote, "God forbid that I should make so foul a shipwreck of my conscience." Burghley convened the Privy Council without Elizabeth's knowledge and dispatched the warrant. Robert Beale, Clerk of the Council, carried it to Fotheringhay. The execution happened on the 8th of February 1587 in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. Henry Grey, Earl of Kent, and George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, had told her the night before. She wrote her final letter to Henri III of France around 2 in the morning. She slept briefly. She did not eat breakfast. She took communion using consecrated wafers Pope Pius V had sent her. 6 attendants were permitted, her ladies Jane Kennedy and Elizabeth Curl, her physician Bourgoin, her steward Andrew Melville, her surgeon, and her apothecary. Roughly 300 spectators filled the great hall. At the threshold Melville knelt weeping. "Madam, it will be the sorrowfullest message that ever I carried, when I shall report that my queen and dear mistress is dead." Mary, dry-eyed, "Rejoice rather than weep, for the end of Mary Stuart's troubles is now done." She kissed him farewell. The scaffold was 2 feet high, 12 feet wide, draped in black, with a low stool, a cushion, and the block. When the executioner, recorded only as Bull, the London public executioner, and his assistant moved to undress her, she stopped them. She said she never had such grooms to make her unready, and that she never put off her clothes before such a company. She called Kennedy and Curl to do it instead. The black satin gown with its acorn-shaped jet and pearl buttons came away. Beneath it, the crimson. A crimson satin bodice. A crimson velvet petticoat. Red, the liturgical colour of Catholic martyrdom, visible now to every person in the hall. Multiple accounts describe an audible reaction from the crowd. Her shoes were Spanish leather worn rough side out, almost certainly for grip on the scaffold. Around her neck she wore a pomander chain and an Agnus Dei, a wax disc stamped with the image of the Lamb. 2 rosaries hung at her waist. She held a gold crucifix and a Latin prayer book. Kennedy bound her eyes with a Corpus Christi cloth, white linen embroidered in gold that Mary had set aside for this purpose. Her last words, repeated 3 or 4 times, "In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum." Into thy hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. Robert Winkfield was there. He wrote the eyewitness account. 2 axe strokes, not 3. The first blow hit the back of her head. The second severed everything except a small piece of sinew. Bull cut through the remaining sinew using the axe blade as a saw. The popular version, 3 clean blows or an assistant finishing with a knife, is embellishment. Bull lifted the head. God save the Queen. And the wig came off. Winkfield, her dressing of lawn falling off from her head, it appeared as grey as one of 70 years old, polled very short. The crowd was looking at a grey-haired woman of 44, not the Auburn Queen of the portraits. Winkfield also recorded that her lips stirred up and down a quarter of an hour after her head was cut off. Physiologically, that is reflex. It would have looked like something else entirely to the people standing in that room. The Dean of Peterborough called out, "So perish all the Queen's enemies." The Earl of Kent answered, "Amen." Then the dog. Winkfield again. One of the executioners, plucking off her garters, espied her little dog which was crept under her clothes, which could not be gotten forth but with force, yet afterward would not depart from the dead corpse, but came and lay between her head and her shoulders, which being imbrued with her blood was carried away and washed. Not a Skye Terrier, the breed did not exist yet, probably a Maltese or similar Bichon type. A small white lapdog soaked in blood lying between a severed head and a headless body refusing to move. The story that the dog later refused food and died of grief is Victorian sentiment. Winkfield does not say it. When Bull reached for the gold rosary at her waist, the executioner's perks, Kennedy protested. Mary had already paid him in coin. The rosary went to Anne Dacre, wife of Philip Howard, Earl of Arundel. It descended through the Dukes of Norfolk and was stolen from Arundel Castle in 2021. Everything else was burned. The English government ordered the block, the scaffold cloth, the blood-soaked clothing, the executioner's cloths, the wooden chips, all of it fed into the Great Hall fireplace. The dog was washed by force. They understood what they had created. Catholic Europe was already calling her a martyr, and every blood-stained splinter was a potential relic. The burning was not clean-up. It was counter-propaganda. Her heart and entrails were buried secretly within Fotheringhay Castle. The location was lost. Her body was sealed in a lead coffin and left at Fotheringhay for nearly 6 months. The lead ruptured in June 1587. A plumber patched it. She was finally buried at Peterborough Cathedral on August 1st, 1587, in a Protestant ceremony near Catherine of Aragon. Her household refused to take communion at the funeral. In 1612, her son James, by then James I of England, ordered the body exhumed and moved to Westminster Abbey. The reburial took place on the 11th of October 1612 in the south aisle of the Lady Chapel, under a marble tomb by Cornelius and William Cure. The tomb is larger and more elaborate than Elizabeth I's tomb in the opposite north aisle. James built his mother's monument to tower over the woman who had killed her. That was a deliberate architectural statement, and it stands there today. In 1869, Dean Arthur Stanley opened the vault while searching for James I's burial. He found Mary's lead coffin against the north wall, sealed in pitch and moulded to the shape of the body, with Arbella Stuart's coffin stacked on top of it. The Stuart vault beneath her tomb contains an extraordinary roll call of the dynasty: Elizabeth of Bohemia, Prince Henry Frederick, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, Anne Hyde, and the numerous infant children of James II and Queen Anne. Dozens of bodies beneath the woman who lost every throne she touched. Fotheringhay Castle was not razed by James in revenge. That is a widely repeated myth. The castle decayed through neglect and was dismantled around 1628. An earthwork mound is all that remains. Mary's cipher, her embroidery, her counterintelligence, her legal challenges, none of it saved her. The trap was too well built. Walsingham controlled the channel. Phelippes controlled the code. The bond of association controlled the law. She wrote one letter too many into a system designed from the ground up to catch exactly that letter. Every political project she touched in life collapsed. Scotland, Darnley, Bothwell, the French alliance, the English succession. She was crowned Queen of one country at 6 days old and died a prisoner of another at 44. 16 years after the axe, her son sat on Elizabeth's throne. Every reigning British monarch since 1603 has descended from her. The motto she stitched on her cloth of state turned out to be the only true thing she ever put into thread. In my end is my beginning.